Welcome. Thanks for coming out on such a dismal afternoon, dismal evening, to this event about women in science fiction. My name's Edward James. I am, as someone pointed out to me earlier, the stunt double for Farah Mendelssohn, who can't be here until later. We both edited the Cambridge Companion to Science Fiction and the Cambridge Companion to Fantasy Literature that are on that table over there. Thanks, Jane, for pointing them out. And I'm chair of the Science Fiction Foundation, which was founded in 1971 for promoting science fiction and promoting the study of science fiction. And from the beginning, I'm pleased to say, we chose Ursula Le Guin as one of our two patrons. She's, I suppose, the most prominent woman science fiction writer of, say, the second or third generation of modern science fiction. But of course there have been women in science fiction all the time. I mean, if you believe Brown Aldiss, and I think I do, Mary Shelley founded science fiction, although, you know, you could go back to the Duchess of Devonshire in the 17th century and say that she did. But women have had a prominent role in science fiction for a long time. And the reason we're having this panel is really not to celebrate that fact, but to rather bemoan the fact that a lot of publishers and booksellers don't seem to be aware of this fact. I have copies in front of me of publicity that another bookshop, not of course Blackwell's, we're very grateful for Blackwell's for organising this event. We're very grateful to Fletcher Books for helping to organise this event too. But it's not Blackwell's who produced this publicity, it's another sort of major bookshop. Can't think of their name. Oh yes, it's on top of this bit of paper. Who produced a guide to science fiction and fantasy recently and told you what to read. For instance, space opera, 10 names, all men. Hard science fiction, 10 names, all men. I can go through it, but I won't. There's very, very few women listed there at all. When they get to the end and say, if you like this author, you might like this. You get to, Trudy Canavan, I think, is the female writer. And if you like Trudy Canavan, apparently you might like other women writers. But there's very few women writers mentioned at all. It is a scandal. I hope this particular bookshop, not Blackwell's, is going to be doing something about it soon. Foyles now across the road now have a table about, well, I say now, I mean this week, have a table devoted to women in science fiction. Blackwell, as you've seen when you walked in, have a table devoted to women in science fiction. Both of them have, quite, I'm not trying to criticise either of them, they have rather small tables. If you want to celebrate women in science fiction, you really need much bigger tables, because there are a lot of writers. And it is, not all these writers are doing very well. And the thing about neglecting publicity is, of course, I mean, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference to a bookseller. It makes a hell of a lot of difference to the careers of women science fiction writers. So I hope this evening we'll look at some of the reasons why this is the case and think what we can do about it. We might get on to some of the other problems that there are in science fiction at the moment. The Science Fiction Writers of America is currently tearing itself apart because of debates between women and misogynist gits who are being vile, to be honest, not just anti-feminist, anti-woman, but racist as well. And there are other problems within the field that we might talk about if we have time, but I think we should probably concentrate on the main task, which is to think about the invisibility of women in science fiction and why that might be. Okay, that's my say. I want to pass this microphone down the line to Karen Lord, to Stephanie Saulter, to Naomi Foyle, to Janet Edwards and to Jane Fenn in that order, and let them introduce themselves, say what they have written, say which publisher publishes them perhaps. We'll start with Karen.
Thank you so much. My name is Karen Lord. I'm the author of Redemption in Indigo and The Best of All Possible Worlds, and also that little tiny piece of something you have on your chairs. That's what's coming next year, The Galaxy Game. I'm published by Fletcher Books in the UK, and I live in Barbados, so this is a foreign country for me. And my perspective on the topic will in fact probably be a little different for some people, because I'm sometimes on the outside looking in. but the other perspectives can be interesting in terms of how other people are viewing you. And I hope that can bring some kind of illumination to the topic as well.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Saulter. I'm the author of Gem Signs and Binary, also published by Fletcher Books. And I live in London. I'm a Londoner, but I'm originally from Jamaica. So I have to tell you that when I first met Jo, my publisher, the very first thing she did was shove a copy of Karen's Redemption in Indigo into my hands and crow about how thrilled she was to be publishing 2 woman Caribbean science fiction authors. And it's interesting because Karen and I write very different books, but she knew clearly that I would love Karen's book, which I did. It's a similar sensibility, possibly. My books have been described as social science fiction, and I am particularly interested in how people interact in response to changes in culture and advances in science and technology, and essentially how they interact to the changes in their environment. And it's interesting what the parallels are in terms of the gender divide within the field within which I write. There end up being a lot of echoes between the environment in which I'm writing and the subjects that my writing is about. Gender being one, race, class, some of the other issues that Edward and Karen alluded to being others. So I find it impactful on my career, but also intellectually quite interesting, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm Naomi Foyle. I've published 2 science fiction novels, Soul Survivors and Astra, also both with Fletcher Books. In my previous writing life and hopefully ongoing writing life, I'm also a poet. So I come at this also as a kind of a newcomer to the genre, and in a sense kind of an outsider as well. But I do have the debates in the poetry world to draw on, and I was quite active in the publishing world in poetry as well. I worked for my poetry publisher for 2 years, and really tried to make a difference in terms of the diversity of our list. And so I'm aware of, I'm very aware that there are similar issues in poetry around reviews, prizes, festival appearances. But I have to say that in the poetry world, I did not feel marginalised as a woman, and it's been quite a revelation to me coming into the science fiction world, because actually I had very rosy tinted glasses when I started, because I loved fantasy as a child, and there were always great fantasy writers. I wasn't particularly into science fiction, but when I came across it and decided to write it, people would hand me, there's a Pat Cadigan book, there's a Gwyneth Lewis book. I had this idea that science fiction was a place where you got to talk about gender, you got to be a visionary. And I kind of rode on that wave, and all this time I was writing Soul Survivors, which took 15 years to get published. And then I finally got my agents to men, it didn't seem a problem. They brought me to Jo, fantastic, she's a wonderful editor and mentor. And then gradually I became aware, that actually I was really being painted into some kind of ghetto here. My first science fiction conference, someone said, I think Janet was at that panel, there are 3 female science fiction writers in the UK under contract right now. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot. Then I was asked, would I use my initials for the European translations? Would I disguise my gender? I was really horrified to think of that at first, and then I thought, well, if that's the way that you have to do it, it's better to smuggle yourself in than not be there at all. And also I've done a little kind of drag acts and personas in my poetry, so I thought, okay, well, let's go for it. And then I was in a poetry, I was a bookshop in Oxford a few months ago, and I was buying a book, so I wasn't going in there, just to get my book on the shelf, but I asked him, do you have a science fiction section? No, we don't have a science fiction section. Would you consider, having a look at my book? Oh, you don't look like a science fiction writer. You're a lady. Okay, so if you've read Soul Survivors, I'm not a lady. I'm no lady. And now this revelation about Waterstones and this list. So I really, it is a problem, and I'd love to say that, it's a great excuse to get together and, meet lots of great women writers, but it is a problem, and I'm looking forward to discussing ways of, addressing it.
I'm Janet Edwards. I've been reading science fiction since I was probably about 6 years old. Now I write it. I'm the author of the Earth Girl trilogy, which is not published by Joe Fletcher Books. It's published by HarperCollins Voyager imprint in this country, and it by Pyre, which is the science fiction imprint of Prometheus Books in America. The theme of these books, they're set in a future where there's a new disability. With portal technology, everybody can portal between different colony worlds, and those people whose immune system means they can only live on Earth are regarded as the new disabled. So I've got a trilogy I've written. Its theme is around prejudice. It's mostly supposed to be fun, but yeah, in a sense, my writing is reflecting this situation as well. In fact, the first EasterCon I went along to, I'd just got my publishing deal, and I went along to this panel and I discovered, what was it? There was only one female science fiction writer under contract, or I can't remember whether I was actually the only one at this point. And it's a bit sort of embarrassing actually sticking your hand up and saying, actually there's me. So.
Hi, I'm Jane Fenn. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, can you hear me without it?
No.
Yeah.
No. Okay. No, thanks for that. Thanks for that. I'm Jane Fenn. I'm author of the Hidden Empire series. They're space opera. I grew up in a house with no books, so reading books made me weird. Then I discovered science fiction. Reading science fiction made me weird. I was already so weird that my gender was completely irrelevant as far as I was concerned, so I could write whatever the hell I wanted, and I liked space opera. I think it's probably got some sensibilities that may identify me shockingly as a woman. People have real relationships and everything. But I do like the big budget, blow it up stuff, although I do write other things as well. I'm not published by Joe Fletcher Books, I'm published by Galantz, but Joe Fletcher was my first editor. And I met Joe in 2007 on a panel whose title was, "Is British SF too male-dominated?" And we said yes. And that was in 2007. And I'm still saying yes, rather cynically.
Thank you. So, can I just say before we carry on with the discussion, I owe a lot of my thoughts on this topic to various blogs by Juliet McKenna, the fantasy writer, and it's very nice to see her sitting on the floor with no chair, rather sadly. Actually, there's a free chair here, Juliet. Because it's not just it's not just science fiction writers who have this problem, it's fantasy writers as well. Although there is a sort of perception that somehow fantasy is for women and science fiction is for men, which isn't just science fiction, is it? I mean, there was something in A New Scientist about a month ago where a reader had discovered that a certain branch of W.H. Smith's had put a copy of New Scientists in the section called Men's Interest, as if women actually aren't interested in the universe, only men. I mean, do you think it is that problem of that science is somehow associated with men?
I'm so glad you asked that question. My first degree is in physics, and I've had the experience of being in what is considered a male-dominated subject, and I also used to be a physics teacher. I do a podcast with Karen Burnham, who used to work for NASA. She now works for an even cooler company, so she's an engineer. And one of the things we discussed was how the attitude around science fiction, especially what they call hard science fiction, mirrors what we found in our academic lives concerning hard sciences and soft sciences. So sometimes what you see being described as hard SF just means science fiction that's based on physics and astronomy. And then the soft is supposedly what's based on social sciences. But ultimately these are very artificial boundaries, because when you're a writer and you're making stuff up, you don't really have to know that much physics to give a good story. But if you're doing something based on social science fiction, there's so much you can get wrong, and it's actually in many ways harder to do a good story based on social science fiction. I say that because my PhD is in sociology of religion, so I can look at it from both sides.
I think it's partly the association of men with science, but more than that, I've had interesting conversations, often with people who, quote unquote, don't read science fiction at all. And when you try to unpack why they think the genre isn't for them, it often comes down to the same parallels between thinking of all science fiction as hard SF and thinking of it as a kind of very action-driven, not very, sort of the golden age where people were going forth and conquering, and there wasn't much about real characters, real relationships, what Jane's very, very aptly described. And so the sense that this is a kind of a lad stories, bloke stories, stuff that isn't particularly sensitive, particularly illuminating of the human condition, particularly appealing to women if one buys those stereotypes in the first place, because frankly it's many women as men, I think, do like to read hard-edge space opera in which things get blown up, and I don't know that the belief that we are less inclined as a gender to read hard adventure stories is true, but I think the belief is certainly there, and so you tie that in with the similarly ill-founded belief that women don't do math and physics, and you've sort of got something that is self-reinforcing on multiple levels. And I think I hate the term hard SF, I have to say, for a number of reasons, not least because it reinforces not only that idea of a masculinized rejection of what one might think of as the softer sciences, the softer skills, but also because it's very exclusionary. It says hard, it says difficult, it says this is not for you. And it's part of maintaining the idea of a club, which has historically been primarily a boys' club.
Yeah, I think it definitely has a lot to do with the way that science is perceived, the way that the nature of woman is perceived, the way it's taught, and the way that boys and girls are socialized, and I think it's a backlash issue as well. There's now this pinkification of girlhood. What's that doing to girls if they want to, if they want to be engineers? If they don't feel that they can play with a truck. And this has been making the news lately, and maybe we can do some networking around the NUT. Maybe we can get in touch with teachers. I think science fiction may also suffer because people feel that it's geeks, it's fans, it's all. But what I love about it is that it feels to me as though it is something that young people can really. If you capture people early on and you think, yes, we can have a better vision for the future, or more interesting perspective on our, critical perspective on culture now in an imaginative way. Young people are really ripe for that. So I would hope that one of the ways to kind of tackle this would be to work with teachers and young people, really. Thank you.
Hard SF is, let's face it, a bit of an unfortunate term. I think we are hopefully past the point where women realise they can study maths and science. I am, by the way, a maths graduate of Oxford University. I think that the remaining sort of label of this is for boys on science fiction is probably coming mostly from a few people who would like to think it was that way, but I would hope actually we are moving past that one.
I feel like a bit of a fake actually, because there's all these science graduates. I went to a girls' school where I could do biology if I had to, I could do chemistry if I gave up needlework, and I didn't know what physics was because it wasn't taught. And I have few regrets in my life, but one of the regrets I do have is that I never really sought out my interest in sciences because it was actively discouraged, which means now writing, and my ISF has been described as hard, which I find quite amusing because I don't have a scientific background. I'd love to have one, but I don't. It's a bit bizarre, really, that we're in this situation. I have to fake it, but at the same time, I have lots of fantastic contacts who'll help me. But it gives me a fundamental insecurity, which personally does not help in the current situation. I should confess at this point that, unlike my fellow panellists, I'm actually out of contract. So, although I'm probably one of the more experienced writers here, I'm one of those that's dropped off the end. So my cynicism may well be showing quite a lot. The other disadvantage of sitting here, of course, is that they've all said it all. I was interested particularly... Well, no, I agree, but I did agree with everything that everybody said. Something that Naomi said, actually, that interested me, I don't know if we're going to be able to return to it, is the perception that science fiction is great when you're young, but women grow out of it. Boys don't have to, but women do. That annoys me.